Over 50 years ago, a series of child murders absolutely terrified the city of Rochester, New York. The killer, or maybe killers, left behind a chilling calling card that turned a tragic crime spree into one of the most infamous, unsolved puzzles in American history.
The attacks were sporadic, which almost made it worse, but the pattern was just horrifying. 3 young girls, all around 10 or 11 years old, abducted, sexually assaulted, and strangled. For 2 terrifying years, parents in upstate New York lived in this constant state of fear, just wondering when and where the killer would strike next.
And this is the detail that made the case infamous. The media dubbed them the alphabet murders because of this chilling, almost unbelievable pattern. Each victim's first and last name started with the same letter, and their bodies were then found in towns that also started with that same letter. I mean, the question that has haunted this case for decades is pretty obvious. Was this a killer's twisted, taunting signature, or was it just a mind-boggling coincidence?
To even begin to understand this puzzle, we really have to look at each victim individually. The story starts back in the fall of 1971.
10-year-old Carmen Colon was just sent to pick up a prescription. She never came home. And what's so heartbreaking about her case is that she almost escaped. During rush hour, dozens of drivers saw her naked from the waist down, running and waving her arms on the side of the interstate. But in an incident that created just intense public outrage, it's estimated over 100 cars just drove by. Drove by before her abductor caught up to her and led her back to his vehicle. 2 days later, her body was found. She had been raped and manually strangled from the front. And then, silence. For 17 long months, the case went completely cold. Then, in April 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowitz vanished after a trip to the grocery store. Her body was found the next day. Like Carmen, she'd been raped and strangled. But this time, the method was different. The killer used a ligature, probably a belt, and attacked from behind. And this is crucial. Investigators found a key piece of forensic evidence on her clothing: white cat fur. And Wanda's family didn't own a white cat. Just 7 months later, the pattern repeated itself. 11-year-old Michelle Mazza didn't come home from school. A witness later recounted this chilling encounter. He saw a man with a flat tire and a little girl, and when he stopped to help, the man kind of pushed Michelle behind him and blocked his license plate. It was so menacing. Michelle's body was found 2 days later. The cause of death was identical to Wanda's: rape and ligature strangulation from behind. And on her clothes, investigators found the exact same thing: white cat fur. So, with the third murder, the police could no longer dismiss the similarities. The alphabet murders became a full-blown manhunt, and the city of Rochester was just paralyzed with fear. And you have to understand, the timeline itself was part of the terror. There were these long, agonizing gaps between the murders where the entire city just held its breath. A year and a half passed between the first and second victims, and then just 7 months until the third. That unpredictability meant every parent feared their child could be next. The scale of the investigation was just immense. I mean, we're talking about police chasing down every possible lead, interviewing more than 800 potential suspects in their desperate search for this killer. The community was desperate for answers too. After Carmen's murder, a reward fund grew to over $6,000, and 5 massive billboards were put up along Rochester's expressways, plastering her face next to that haunting question. It did generate some leads, but ultimately, no arrests.
So, this massive investigation, it did produce several really strong persons of interest over the years. Let's take a look at the lineup, because some of these suspects seemed almost too perfect to be a coincidence.
Okay, let's start with Carmen's own uncle, Miguel Colon. He couldn't account for where he was on the day of the murder. His car matched witness descriptions, and just 4 days after his niece was killed, he abruptly moved to Puerto Rico. It was all highly suspicious, but there was no physical evidence. It was purely circumstantial. He was never charged, and he died by suicide in 1991.
Then you have Dennis Termini, a Rochester firefighter who is known as the Garage Rapist. His crime spree of at least 14 assaults overlapped perfectly with the alphabet murders. He drove a beige car that matched descriptions, and, most importantly, when police searched his vehicle after he took his own life during a police chase, they found white cat fur.
Now, this next person of interest was Kenneth Bianchi, a name you might recognize. He would later become infamous as one of the Hillside Stranglers in Los Angeles. But during the time of the alphabet murders, Bianchi was living right there in Rochester, working as an ice cream vendor near 2 of the crime scenes and driving a similar car. Though he's always been on the radar for this, he was never charged and to this day denies any involvement.
But perhaps the most bizarre potential connection came years later, with the arrest of a California serial killer named Joseph Nasso. I mean, this is almost unbelievable. Nasso had lived in Rochester in the 70s, he targeted victims with double initials, and, in an absolutely insane twist, one of his California victims was also named Carmen Colon. It seemed like the perfect fit, a slam dunk, but the science said otherwise. His DNA was not a match for the sample recovered from Wanda Walkowicz.
So, with this whole list of compelling suspects, but no definitive proof, the investigation eventually turned inward. They started re-examining the very premise of the entire case.
Over time, a lot of investigators and authors have come to believe there wasn't one alphabet killer, but maybe two, and the evidence really lies in the different methods. See, Carmen was strangled manually, face-to-face, which suggests a crime of personal rage, but Wanda and Michelle, they were strangled from behind with a ligature, a much more detached method. Their bodies were also redressed, Carmen's was not. These differences really do point to two very different psychological profiles.
So this leads to a pretty stunning conclusion. The very signature that made the case famous might have been a complete red herring. The leading theory today is that Carmen Colon was killed by someone she knew, possibly her uncle, while Wanda Walkowicz and Michelle Maenza were victims of a different predator, someone like Dennis Termini. The alliterative names in this view were just a tragic coincidence that sent the investigation down a rabbit hole for decades.
But the story isn't over. One critical piece of evidence remains, the DNA sample collected from Wanda Walkowicz's body. For 50 years, it has held the killer's secret. And now, with huge advancements in forensic genetic genealogy, there's renewed hope. A half-century of questions, theories, and dead ends could finally be resolved, providing an answer not just for Wanda, but maybe for Michelle as well, and finally closing one of the most haunting cold cases in American history.